Senate will come to order. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call, Legislative Day 12, Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. Anderson? Barlow? Boner? Brennan? Case? Cooper? Present. Case present. Cooper? Crago? Crum? Dockstetter? Driscoll? French? Guru? Hicks? Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Jones? Kolb? Landon? Larson? McEwen? Nethercott? Olson? Pappas? Pearson? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Smith? Steinmetz? President Beitman.
Here.
Mr. President, 31 present.
Thank you, Ellen. Prayer by Father Thomas Cronkleton Jr., St. Mary's Cathedral.
Let us pray. Lord Jesus, it is midweek and the weekend is still far away, and tiredness can begin to weigh upon us. You tell us, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy, my burden light." Help us to lean into you and to allow you to help us to carry the load by allowing your love and grace to be at work within us. Be with us on this last day to introduce bills and resolutions. If we must choose to leave items unconsidered, help us to be judicious and prudent about what is left unattended. May our discussions, debate, and votes be graced by you in all the business and actions that are before us. We ask this in all things in your name. Amen.
Senator Driscoll, will you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading, correction, and approval of journal.
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 28, 2025 has been read and recommended to be approved. Senator Crum, Chairman.
Are there any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. Good job, Chairman Crum. Today in history, the 1936, the United States Baseball Hall of Fame elects its first members in Cooperstown, New York. Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. Hooray. Quote of the day: coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. Henry Ford. Dad joke of the day: where do you learn to make ice cream? At Sunday school. Yeah? Yep, there it is. All right, last day for Senate files to be introduced today. That's your announcement. All right. We have no doctor of the day, so be careful on the stairs, please. Too soon? Okay. All right. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Senate File 169.
Senate File 169, Strategic Investments and Projects Account Repeal.
Senate File 169 is assigned to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Senate File 177, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 177, Primary Residence Property Tax Fund.
Senate File 177 is assigned to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 185, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 185, Governmental Property Taxation and Sale.
Senate File 185 is assigned to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 188, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 188, Teacher Tenure.
Senate File 188 is assigned to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 195, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 195, Small Business Emergency Bridge Loan Program.
Senate File 195 is assigned to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 196, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 196, Second Amendment Protection Act Amendments.
Senate File 196 is assigned to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 174, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 174, Constitutional Apportionment 2.
Senate File 174 is assigned to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 193, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 193, Electric Utility Service Agreements, Large Loads.
Senate File 193 is assigned to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 186, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 186, Advanced Nuclear Reactor Manufacturers, Fuel Storage.
Senate File 186 is assigned to Committee Number 9, Minerals. Senate File 172, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 172, Physical Therapy Licensure Compact.
Senate File 172 is assigned to Committee Number 10, Labor. Senate File 187, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 187, Public Employee Retirement Plan, Contributions.
Senate File 187 is assigned to Committee Number 10, Labor. Folks, if you have bills that you want to get out, get with me and tell me which committees you'd prefer to get them to, and we'll take a look at it, getting all these bills going, so. Reports from standing committees.
January 28, 2025. Mr. President, your Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 77, Compelled Speech is Not Free Speech, respectfully report same back to the House Senate with the recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Crago, Crum, Hicks, Kolb, and Olson. Senator Olson, Chairman.
Okay. Bills on second reading. Thank you. Senate File 30, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 30, Wyoming's Investment in Veterans' Mental Health.
Senate File 30 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 69, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 69, Homeowner Property Tax Exemption.
Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, absent objection, I ask that this bill be laid back one day.
Hearing no objection, Senate File 69 has been laid back for one day. Senate File 75, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 75, Coroner Investigations, Disposition of Decedent's Property.
Senate File 75, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 79, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 79, District Court's Change of Venue.
Senate File 79, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 109, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 109, Open Enrollment Within Wyoming School Districts.
There is an amendment. Will the reading clerk please read the amendment?
Senate File 109, second reading amendment number 1, page 4, line 20, after.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move second reading amendment number 1, Senate File 109, and ask for the body's favorable consideration. Members, I brought up the transportation issue yesterday. This would insert that type of language. The similar we have already in the bill talks about a program. There's no obligation for the district to create a program if someone chooses a different school. This would say they don't have an obligation to provide transportation if that student or if that family opts for a school that would maybe otherwise require transportation. So I'd ask for your favorable consideration, but you have to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Discussion, Senator Brennan, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate this amendment and would just ask that everybody would vote aye on this.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none? Ready for the question? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Barlow's motion to adopt second reading amendment number 1 in Senate File 109, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. Back on the bill. Senate File 109, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 115, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 115, Judicial Review of Agency Actions Limitations.
Senate File 115, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 122, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 122, Voyeurism Sex Offender Registration Amendment.
Senate File 122, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading and final passage. Madam Majority Floor Leader, do we have a consent list?
Mr. President, I move the third reading consent list, which is as follows. Senate File 17, Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Stimulus. Senate File 39, Automatic Transfer of Automatic Title Upon Death. Automatic Transfer of Automobile Title Upon Death. Senate File 78, Prohibition on Distribution of Unsolicited Ballot Forms. Senate File 84, Country of Origin Label USA Beef. Senate Joint Resolution 3, Commemorating Nellie Taylor Ross.
Thank you, Madam Majority Floor Leader. Would anybody like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Okay. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 17, Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Stimulus. Senate File 39, Automatic Transfer of Automobile Title Upon Death. Senate File 78, Prohibition on Distribution of Unsolicited Ballot Forms. Senate File 84, Country of Origin Label USA Beef. And Senate Joint Resolution 3, Commemorating Nellie Taylor Ross. Will the Chief Clerk please call the roll?
On the consent list, Anderson? Barlow? Boner? Brennan? Case? Cooper? Crago? Crum? Dockstader? Driscoll? French? Guru? Hicks? Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Kolb? Landon? Larson? McEwen? Nethercott? Olson? Pappas? Pearson? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Smith? Steinmetz? President Beitman.
Aye.
On the consent list, 31 aye. Senate File 17, are there any changes? Ide? Ide no. French? Ide to no. Larson? Ide to no. Hutchings? Ide to no. Pearson? Ide to no. Steinmetz? Ide to no. Case? I to know McEwen. I to know Smith. I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 17, 22 aye, 9 no. Senate File 39, are there any changes? Guru, aye to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 39, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 78, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 78, 31 aye. Senate File 84, are there any changes? Scott? No?
Bateman, I to know.
Whitman? No? Closing vote. Case? No? Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 84, 28 aye, 3 no. Senate Joint Resolution Number 3. Are there any changes? Aye? Aye to no? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution 3. 30 aye, 1 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 17, Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Stimulus. Senate File 39, Automatic Transfer of Automobile Title Upon Death. Senate File 78, Prohibition on Distribution of Unsolicited Ballot Forms. Senate File 84, Country of Origin Label, Beef, USA Beef. And Senate Joint Resolution 3, commemorating Nellie Taylor Ross, have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading. Senate File 42, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 42, Resort Hotel Liquor Licenses, sponsored by Senator Guru, an act relating to alcoholic beverages.
There is an amendment. Will the reading clerk read the amendment?
Senate File 42, third reading amendment number 1, page 1, line 14, after.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, could I have that read in?
It just was.
We just read it in, all right.
Yep.
Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 42. Members of the body, as we listen to the discussion from my colleague from Teton County about how this is going to really provide a lot of economic opportunity, stimulate the economy, what became apparently clear to me is if this is true, why don't we lower the bar so more people can have an economic opportunity to provide malt beverage liquors at their resorts? And as representing an area that has a lot of these small, what we call them dude ranches and stuff, this would lower that bar, make more people eligible for this resort liquor licenses. And so think about some of these facilities are 20, 30, 40 miles from town. Under the current construct, they're not eligible to do this. If we reduce the dollar amount, of the value of the facility, reduce the number of rooms, and then eliminate the provision that says you have to have a meeting room for 50 people. This really broadens this out to address a lot of those more remote locations around the state of Wyoming to be able to participate in this resort liquor license. Mr. Chairman, that's the amendment. And the only thing the amendment does is it says to be eligible, you have to be at least a minimum of 5 miles from the city limits. And the reason that is in there, it doesn't seem unreasonable for somebody to have to drive 5 miles to go to packaged liquor to acquire that if they want to bring that back to their room or utilize it at that facility. And so those are the 4 provisions in the bill. I'd stand for any, or in the amendment, Mr. President, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions? Senator Guru. For your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I understand and agree with a lot of the goals of this amendment. And I do, you know, as I said, and I know it's been a couple of days, I'm sorry about that, we've had a couple of delays, but we are trying for economic development, that's true. And we are trying to lower the bar, that also is true. So, but there's one piece of this that I'm not, that I can't go with, and so I'm going to ask at this time that we divide this amendment. So if you'll, it's a 3-way split, so if you'll grab your pens, and Mr. President, I would propose that we divide this amendment. Division number 1 is page 1, line 14 and line 15. So that's on the amendment itself, that's 1, 2, and 3, lines 1, 2, and 3. Also, in Division 1, lines 12 through 16. So that's division number 1 is page 1, lines 14 and 15. Also, page 3, lines 4 and 5, plus the language that is inserted in that lower part of the amendment. So then the amendment, it's lines 12 through 16. So that's division number 1. That division is all just about the 5-mile rule outside of the city limits. That's all that part of the amendment. Next division is page 2, lines 11 and line 12. And it's on the amendment, it's lines 4 through 8. That is the dollar amount, lowering the threshold from $10 million investment to $5 million investment. The third division is page 2, line 20, or on the amendment, lines 9, 10, and 11. That's the provision to take it from 35 rooms, which it is currently in the bill, down to 20. So 3 divisions, 1 about the 5-mile rule, which is in 2 pieces of the amendment. 2 is about the $10 million threshold, and 3 is about the room count. And that is my 3-way split. I think it's divisible. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I do agree that it is divisible. Which division would you like to take up first?
I would like to take up number 2 first.
Okay, for your first time. Oh, Senator Hicks.
If I know, I don't know that Division 1 is divisible. I agree with, if you do that and you take Division 1 and you go down to line 15 and 16 correspond with 1, 2, and 3. But when you get down to line 13 on the amendment and you deal with page 3, lines 4 and 5, that specific thing does not deal with the city limits and the 5 miles for cities and towns. That says provide facilities for business meetings that accommodate not less than 50 participants. So that's for the business meeting room for 50 people. That's separate than the 5-mile limit. And so what I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, to get to the issue of be located within 5 miles, that Division 1 would be lines 1 through 3 and 15 through 16. Because lines 13 deals specifically with providing facilities for business meetings that can be accommodated for not less than 50 participants.
Senator Hicks, I ruled that it was divisible. I believe that all three of those divisions could stand on their own. So if you want to challenge the rule of the chair, you can, but let's keep this train moving here.
So, Mr. President, I would like to further divide Division 1.
It is in order.
And so, Mr. Chairman, the new division, Division 1, so would go down in line 13, which deals with page 3, lines 4 and 5, would be a separate division, which would be Division 4.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
So while it's in order to further divide, that division is not in order. Lines 15 and 16 rely on line 13 and cannot be separated from line 13. Line 13 refers to the place and the line numbers. It says delete entirely and insert, so it's grounded in the requirement for that. So while the good senator's point about content is accurate, you know, there's some differences in content, that has to be argued on its merit. The division doesn't stand alone as a further division of 1 at this time, although it would stand alone if it was desirable to have lines 1 through 4 be a Division 1A and lines 13 through 16 be a Division 1B, but I don't think that's consistent with the desire of the senator, so.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and really that's what I'm trying to get to, is it'd be Division 1A, 1B. What I would like to do is just have a discussion about a facility for the business meetings that accommodate 50 participants. I'm okay with the discussion as far as 5-mile limit, I think, but it's really 2 discussions, so if we can accomplish that with the suggestion provided from my colleague from the Ivory Towers, I would certainly like to accomplish that by doing a Division 1A and a 1B by taking that line 13 as 1B. Division 1B would be line 13.
Senator Rothfuss, point of order.
And again, 13 cannot stand alone without 15 and 16. It isolates 15 and 16. Lines 15 and 16, which are currently part of Division 1, have to stay with 13. So even though I understand the desire to debate these concepts separately, it doesn't stand alone as a division. The only thing that would be keeping 13 through 16 together as a 1B and having 1 through 4 as a 1A. But again, I don't think that accomplishes the objective.
Senator
Looking
Hicks. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would concur with that. So let's just go with the original divisions proposed by my colleague from Teton County. So we have Divisions 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. President. So Division 2 is the one I'd like to speak to first, and then we'll get to 1 there at the end. But Division 2, on and 4, the $10 million threshold was more an attempt by myself to talk, when talking about economic development, I wanted to show that I wanted the business folks coming in to do this to have real skin in the game. And I know, you know, and $10 million is definitely skin in the game in my book. So is 5. And really a lot of good counsel came from a lot of our smaller communities that said the $10 million was too much. And so I'm on and for Division number 2. On and for Division number 2, the $5 million instead of $10 million.
Your discussion, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, I might be able to support this portion of the amendment, but I really didn't see this amendment until I got here this morning, and I will just tell you, we struck a balance in our Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee. There are opposing forces out there. I think that they've been able to come together on this bill, and I just hate to see us on a 3rd reading do anything to jeopardize what I think is a good bill. So I'll be a no throughout on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anybody else for their first time on Division 2? First time, Division 2. Second time for the sponsor? Are you good? Okay, question being called. All those in favor of Senator Grew's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1, Division 2 to Senate File 42, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The amendment, or Division 2 has been adopted. Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, Division 3. This is page 2, lines 20, or lines 9, 10, and 11 on the amendment itself. What this does is lower the room count from 35 to 20. Once again, going through this process up to now, I thought 35 was the number of rooms that, trying to make it so it could work economically for developers, and also kind of close the door to some unintended consequences with smaller places, with smaller. But once again, afterwards, I was counseled by some of our smaller communities that maybe 35 was too many. So while, and I think the good senator from the Natrona County is true, the committee worked through this bill, and I really appreciated all their help as we went through it. This was asked, like I say, personally, I'm kind of still on 35, but I'm kind of agnostic on this. Vote your conscience, vote it up or down to 35 or 20, so yes or no on this amendment is fine. Thank you, Mr. President.
Discussion on Division 3, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. On for Division 3, I think this is really important from some of our smaller communities that are, for different reasons, dealing with growth in the population that maybe isn't necessarily reflected in the census. So on for that division, I do think it's important to do what we can to reduce this very restrictive and sometimes arbitrary system we have with liquor licenses.
Thank you. Anybody else for the first time on Division 3? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Grew's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1 to Senate, or Division number 3 of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 42, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Division number 3 has been adopted. Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now to Division number 1, on and against Division 1. And we'll take it, it is kind of in two pieces, but the way it was constructed, it was together. That's why I had to kind of throw them together to keep them divisible. So there are two small concepts involved. The biggest one is the 5-mile rule. And that, I think, is a crippler for this bill, and that's why I'm against it. We want to have, this one has a lot of unintended consequences. A 5-mile limit in a lot of, especially smaller towns, a lot of our smaller communities, is way too far away. And the reason that the Goodbringer brought to say it was a good rule and why he's supporting it was about packaged liquor. Need to remember a key fact. With a resort liquor license, you can sell packaged liquor, but it can only be consumed on premises. You cannot open a liquor store here. You can go and buy a bottle of something, a bottle of wine or something, and then take it to your room or take it to the pool or take it to the meeting room or whatever. And that's all you can do. It has to stay on the premises. So it is specifically not for off sale. And that's the one thing that our good folks at the Liquor Division really key on them with these resort licenses, because local retailers in anywhere in the area always want to make sure that you're not creeping in, that there's not mission creep into a liquor store. And so they're specifically not allowed in this. So that's was at heart what I heard the bringer say as one of his main points. But also, too, like I say, in these smaller communities, a 5-mile rule is an arbitrary number that actually won't work for some, and actually could restrict what I'm trying to get at, and that is good economic development. As for the second part, this too is key, because a resort, and a key difference between a resort and a motel is a meeting room. And so, once again, as I talked on first reading, Mr. President, the vision for this is to to have a restaurant, which we'll talk about in the Second Amendment, but also have more of a full-service meeting room so you could have a wedding, a small meeting, and a small event. And so that is at the essence of these small, or as some call them, boutique resorts, very necessary. So on and against division number 1.
Anybody else on division number 1? Nobody? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Grew's motion to adopt division number 1 to third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 42, please say.
Mr. Grew,
Senator Smith.
Senator Grew just said he was against this division amendment. So if we are in agreement with him, do we vote aye or nay?
Senator Smith, the motion to adopt is when you move an amendment, you're making the motion to adopt. He in his speech said to vote no, but the motion is to adopt.
Okay.
I'll start over. All those in favor of Senator Grew's motion to adopt Division 1 of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 42, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. That division has failed. We're back on the bill. There is another amendment. Will the reading clerk please reading the amendment?
Senate File 42, third reading amendment number 2, page 2, lines 16 and 17, delete.
Back to you, Senator Grew.
Mr. President, this time I'd like to move third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42 and ask for your favorable consideration. Mr. President, this is, it's kind of funny. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal, and here's why. Or what this does actually is very prescriptively, as you read this, define what a restaurant is. The reason for this amendment, and this is kind of the key to the whole deal, but as I told you in the beginning, we had the support of folks in cities and towns for its economic development possibilities. The people who sell real estate in our state were for it because of the economic possibilities. But we had a problem with our friends who sell retail liquor, and we had a little problem with some folks in the hotel industry. This amendment gets both of those folks, all their questions satisfied, and support from both. So this is kind of your kumbaya amendment. And what it does, to satisfy those two groups, is very, very pointedly telling us what a restaurant is, and more importantly, what it isn't. So just to go through it, a full-service restaurant that should be open for business not less than 12 hours a day and not less than 6 days a week. At the discretion of the appropriate licensing authority, variance to this time requirement may be granted. So that means that if it's an off-season deal where it's a summer business or a winter business, the licensing authority can grant the owner relief from those hours. So it's not just the owner saying, oh, I'm not busy this week, I'm going to close down. But from there, the rest of the amendment talks specifically about what a restaurant is and what restaurant we're looking for. It's a full-service restaurant, printed menu. So we're not talking about a pizza oven in the motel lobby selling frozen pizzas out of a freezer, and that's their restaurant so they can sell liquor. No, a full-service restaurant with table service, printed menus, the whole shot. That's what this is about. On and for amendment number 2, and like I say, this is the amendment that gets the liquor industry and the hotel industry on board with this bill and has their full support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, on and against third reading amendment number 2. And so if you go to the bill, and so we would delete entirely, there's already a definition of what constitutes a restroom in statutes. And so it's right there. That's what we've said. Everybody in the state of Wyoming knows what a restaurant is. For us that have been around here a long time, what we call this amendment, it's called a fencing amendment. And we want to fence everybody out of a hotel liquor license, because if you don't have, so read it. So if you go down to line 13, it says, for the purposes of this paragraph, the service of only fry orders for sandwiches, hamburgers, or salads shall not qualify as a restaurant. So If you've got those on the menu and you're just kind of a, breakfast sandwich shop, you're not involved. You can't participate in this. We have to have waiters now. The whole thing. This is designed to fence people out of the ability to participate in this program. We see these all the time, that certain industries don't want anybody else to play in my playground. So we create these fences, and we've redefined for this specific purpose as to what constitutes a restaurant. It's already in statutes, folks, but that's not good enough, because that allows too many people to participate in these hotel liquor licenses. So we have to fence these people out from being able to get one of these licenses. On and against this amendment.
Anybody else for the first time? Senator Case.
Mr. President, thank you. I want to remind everybody I have a conflict on this bill, but according to our custom and our rules, I'm entitled to speak, and I would ask you to resist this amendment. This is unbelievably bad to me. It doesn't really recognize how things work in the business. I hold a resort liquor license. I can't believe that these two associations want to do this to me. It would be very common, for example, to have, one thing about these little resort properties that are catering to business, they may be empty until nothing's going on until the weekend when you pick the organization comes and books your place and fills it up. So it's comfort center. And so you may limit your operations to that point in time. So, and it's not uncommon. A restaurant is the hardest business there is in the world, you guys. You may shave your hours in the winter. You may shave your hours during the week. This kind of says you can go to the licensing authority and say, seasonal basis, okay? Well, seasons. But it's even more fine-tuned than that. If you have nobody in your facility, why do you have to have the restaurant open? And especially if you're 5 miles out of town. So sometimes you might run your restaurant. It's very common for restaurants to be closed 2 days a week. Regular full-service restaurant, you see that a lot. They might take Sunday and Monday off, okay? It's pretty frequent that they might have dinner service 5 days a week or 3 days a week, and then breakfast and lunch on another time. That's common. You all see it. And then the killer in this is the very last sentence. I can't even believe that anybody came up with this stuff. Fry orders for sandwiches, hamburgers, or salads shall not qualify as a full-service restaurant. Sandwiches, hamburgers, or salads. For some restaurants, that's what they do. And some resort, this is, well, what are we going to have? Cordon bleu and filet mignon, who's going to decide? What's a fry order? Are eggs a fry order? This is ludicrous. And I'm a conflict on this bill, and I can't believe that this is put in front of us.
Anybody else for the first time? Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, thank you. On and for this bill, if there's been any other signal that we needed regarding profound revisions to our liquor laws in this state, it is this amendment provided by the retail liquor groups that is so wildly restrictive. A restaurant, and only to be considered a full restaurant, you have to have paper menus, because those are our Republican values. We dictate the material your menu can be on. It can't be on a chalkboard in the front of the restaurant. Nope. Has to be paper, handed out. And we're going to restrict the type of food you can do. I feel bad for the sponsor of this bill, knowing the threat that particular effort presents to one's bills in trying to loosen up the liquor laws in this state. But I fear this is a poison pill that he has to swallow in order to get the bill across the line. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to the people of Wyoming. I don't think it's fair to our businesses. And I don't think it's the right result for a free market recognizing the sensitivity that is needed when it comes to liquor sales, but this is getting out of hand. On and against the amendment, on and for the bill.
Anybody else for the first time? Senator Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the amendment and for the bill as well. I want to key into the actual definition in Title 12 of restaurant, the existing definition. To me, the distinguishing factor is that the existing definition says that your sales must be for food primarily, not malt beverages or alcohol. That operative language is missing from the new definition, which to me is the main difference, I think, in the original definition, as opposed to whether you serve salads or hamburgers or paper menus or whatever it may be. So I just wanted to point the body back to the original the definition that we've been operating under for some time now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dockstader for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having sat through the presentation in committee, there was no discussion about any of this, and all of a sudden on third reading, we're taking the deep dive into the kitchen and fry orders and all of this. So word from the sponsor, why are we here at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jones for your first time.
Mr. President, I just have a question. The food trucks have gotten super popular in my neck of the woods. I'm not sure if they are all across the state, but parking a food truck outside and having a waitress deliver it, would that constitute? They have a kitchen, they could have a printed menu. I'm just wondering if that would work.
Anybody else for their first time? Second time before we kick it back to the sponsor. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, to answer my colleague from Sweetwater County, if that truck was parked there for 12 hours each day, not less than 6 days a week, was parked out there, and at the discretion of the appropriate licensing agency, they could park there for 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, then it might, as long as they didn't serve hamburgers, salads, or sandwiches, as long as it was lobster tail and prime rib and they were parked there, they might be eligible. But other than meeting those circumstances, I just don't think they're going to meet the tests as provided in the amendment.
Second time before the sponsor. Seeing none, back to you, Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks, everybody. Great discussion. Let's start parsing out the boogie bin out of this one, okay? Wanted to turn your attention first to line 14 of the amendment. This is where we talk about what has been talked about here is, the Chateaubriand Amendment here. The key operative words in that sentence on line 14 are only fry orders or sandwiches, hamburgers, or salads do not qualify as a full-service restaurant. The meaning is if you do all of them, it does. What they're trying to say back again, what we're heading back towards is to be prescriptive about saying you can't put a box with, and I'm not getting down on this because my friends in the C-store industry, but a refrigerator with a microwave sandwich and a microwave, that constitutes a restaurant, so you can now serve liquor. Or that you just serve a hamburger that's pre-frozen and set out the door, or just have a fryer and just drop something in it and that's how it goes out the door. So that's it. Only if you served all of those things, you actually would qualify as a restaurant. So that's the deal there. What we're looking to do, and what I think my friends in the industry were looking to do, is to prescribe what it is that I was actually looking for in the first place. A small boutique or a small hotel with a full-service restaurant with a printed menu. They wanted to try to define it harder, only so folks couldn't game the system. That was the concern, which the bringer of the first motion, or the first amendment, was saying he was trying to correct by his amendments, and then now he's speaking against it. So it's hard to keep up with the good bringer of the First Amendment, how he argues the second. On and for this amendment, folks. This amendment just provides a prescription so the liquor division knows that a restaurant is a full-service restaurant. In closing, Mr. President, I also agree with my good friend from Fremont County and about the difficulties of opening a restaurant. I opened one on March 15th, 1980. Thyra Thompson, our former Secretary of State, signed the papers of incorporation. I've been in the business for a long time. I know how hard it is. I know exactly how hard it is. In this country, independent restaurants that open, 75% close in the first 18 months. 85% close in the first 4 years. As I cruise towards my 50th year in the business, I can tell you, it is tough. But this bill is here, and this amendment is here to make it tough, because what we want is good economic development. This isn't about my county. It really isn't. As I said in the beginning, it started with a request from a constituent in my county. But what this bill is written, and I do apologize, but it has morphed a bit, because we're talking about the whole state, and it's gotten a wider scope, which I'm very proud of. And I think as we move forward in this industry, we should all be proud of it. Our state's second largest industry. A lot of folks were around this week talking here. So on and for this. I also want to close by saying that I went through this before on the amendment. Went through these amendments before when we tried to pass a restaurant liquor license bill. All the same type of questions were fessed out at that point, were brought up. How bad it was going to be. It was going to shut everyone down. And so, we'll talk about that too. But now on and for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All those in favor of Senator Gru's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Third reading amendment number 2 has failed. Back on the bill. Senator Gru, for your first time on the bill.
Well, just probably we've talked about, we beat this horse just about to death, but I just want to say, I do appreciate the discussion. It's been a great discussion on this bill. I urge your support for it. I think we can still make this work. And like I say, as far as those of you that are concerned about this, I have been through it before. When we debated this about restaurant liquor licenses 30 years ago, we had all these same arguments and none of them bore out. And today restaurants serve alcohol and it's a nice amenity and it's built the economy of this state, and so will this bill. On and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on the bill? Question being called. Senate File 42 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 42. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case conflict? Case conflict. Cooper? Aye. Craigo? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Conflict? French? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? No. Kolb? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Conflict? Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 42, 23 aye, 5 no, 3 conflict.
Senate File 42 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate. Senate File 42 has passed the Senate. Senate File 60, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 60, Sales Tax Distribution Rates, sponsored by Senator French, an act relating to sales and use tax.
There's an amendment. Will the reading clerk please read the amendment?
Senate File 60, third reading amendment number 1, page 5, line 21, delete.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, can we lay this amendment back until after the second amendment? There may or may not be an interplay between the two.
Hearing no objection, this amendment will be laid back pending the result of the second amendment. Third reading amendment number 2, will the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 60, third reading amendment number 2, page 1 above line 1, in.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 60. When asked to-
Correction, Senator number 2.
Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 60 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members of the body, we have had quite a bit of discussion on this, trying to figure out how we could deal with some of these sales and use taxes. What this amendment does is go in and it will capture the first $73 million of sales and use taxes. So if you go up there to line 1, it's roughly $66.1 million a month. That will go into a local distribution, local government distribution account. So those sales taxes flies in there. We capture sales tax every month. 6.1 million of that sales tax will flow into the local government distribution account. If you add up that 6.1 per month, it's roughly a little over 73 million. That's currently what we put out to the cities, towns, and counties on an annual basis through local government distributions. And so what the bill does is it takes those, and then everything else in this bill, or in this amendment, Mr. President, it just adopts our local distribution formula that we currently use. Every biennium, we come down here and we provide some level of local distributions, and it uses the exact same formula, 1/3 to counties, 2/3 to cities and towns. It breaks those between 1/3 and 2/3, that's existing distribution, and then it brings in the hardship formula. If you get over onto page 2, that's the 5% of the 2/3 and the 1/3. That's distributed out as a hardship to those poor counties and those poor cities. It's exactly what we've done in the 15 years that I've been here. Exact same formula. Mr. Chairman, that's what it does, but the purpose of this is, this just provides some reassurances that these counties have a consistent, and cities, towns, and counties have a consistent flow of money. Every year they know they're gonna get this amount, this 73, it's coming out of the sales tax. Right now, what happens is we gather up all the sales tax, they flow into the general fund, we come down here, we sponsor a bill called Local Government Distributions, we debate the bill, we pass the bill, and we fund it. This just provides a process rather than taking out of this pocket, putting it into this pocket, and then shifting it into this pocket, and then handing it out. It just says it automatically flows in there and simplifies that process and provides some reassurances to those cities, towns, and counties that they're going to get this base level of funding every year through the local distributions. That's what it does. Stand for any questions, Mr. President.
Any questions? Senator Rothfuss, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and for the amendment, but I do have some questions. Can we get a reiteration of the total amount that is going through this formula relative to being distributed through the traditional mechanism out to the cities, towns, and counties? That was a little bit unclear. I know we've got a fixed number here. It's my understanding, but I'm uncertain that that's the monthly, and then I'm taking that over the course of a year. So we take that out of the $190-ish million that we're distributing this way and put something like 72 million of that through the hardship formula. Is that accurate? Is the first question. Second question is, this is static rather than changing with time, so it seems like it's not inflation proof or in any way sensitive to what the total revenue through sales and use tax is going to be, and obviously won't grow with the future, where over the years we've ended up increasing the direct distribution, recognizing that there's inflationary needs. Was that a consideration, or am I missing something that would account for that in the amendment? Thank you, Mr. President.
Anybody else? Senator Larson for your first time.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think it's stated in there, the first 6 million that comes in every month, 6 million plus. What happens to the excess? Is it distributed from where the sales tax is gathered?
Anybody else? Senator French for your first time.
Good senators, I would ask you to vote against this amendment. This is not even close to my original intent in this bill, not even close. My bill wasn't about direct distribution and everything. It's morphed into this thing. So I would ask you, please vote against this amendment.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is exactly the question I was going to ask the author of the bill. Where are we at on this? It's completely different from the bill that you had brought forward. So thank you for that statement.
Anybody else for their first time? Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. So I've been down here a while, and one of my little rules of thumb is if a third reading amendment gets past 3 pages, my eyes kind of glaze over. It's just a thing, probably, maybe I'm the only one. This is an awful lot on third reading. And I agree with the senator who brought a notion to us via a bill. Originally, I was able to get on the bill because I thought, you know what, this is a new approach that I think we could walk before we run. Let's take a look at this. And I supported the bill on committee of the whole. This is not that bill. This may do some good things. Maybe it protects those small towns that we talked about out here, you know, that don't get any sales tax revenue. I'm concerned about that. I have a fondness for a lot of those smaller places that don't have the wherewithal. I think this solves it. I haven't been able to track in all of this. It's 6 or 7 or 8 pages. I'm going to be a no on the amendment, Mr. President, just because it's third reading and because it's this big. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody else? Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to applaud the work that's been done on this concept. I think it's meritorious. I mean, I think it's worthwhile. I think we should continue to focus on it as we understand how to address the concerns with locals and their funding sources. I think a third reading amendment on something so encompassing on so many communities, including the legislature, is not the prudent way. I'm concerned it goes outside of the scope of the bill title and presents constitutional concerns as a result. Again, I think the concept is really good. I hope to see a bill next session with real application and understanding how it will affect both the state funds and the local distributions and have a more meaningful conversation. So on and against this amendment, not because the idea is bad, but because it's just not appropriate at this time. I think it goes beyond the bill title, and I think we don't fully appreciate the consequences of our conduct.
Bills for their first time before we go back. Senator Grew for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against, I couldn't agree more. I think this could be the bill of the session next year, when we know what the sales tax or the property tax ramifications of all the things that are coming at us this week and next and coming from the body down the hall. When we have those numbers, when we start to see what that picture looks like, all of a sudden this good work becomes very, very relevant, very real, and very necessary. But right now, I think it's just a little bit of that cart before the horse. So on and against, thank you.
Senator Boner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm for the amendment. Appreciate the concern I've heard from many of my colleagues. I'd point out that it's possible to amend the bill and then, I believe, lay it back to the next day. I think that this concept has a lot of merit. I I think it does strike a balance when it comes to all the changing factors we're dealing with the ability for our local governments to raise taxes. It strikes a good balance between state support of the communities that need it and more independence for those who don't necessarily need the support. I think this is a really good policy that will help move us past our tendency to want to micromanage our municipalities. So I'm for the amendment. I hope we can pass it. And if folks don't necessarily feel comfortable with voting on this bill here today, due to this amendment, we can always lay it back.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody else want to get in on it? Yes, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. The amendment as it's written helps all of my small towns and small counties, brings them back to whole. The bill as it is written hurts those same towns and counties. So the only way I can support the bill is with the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else for the first time before we start rolling through? Senator Rothfuss for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate all the concerns that folks have raised with the amendment, but those concerns are largely caused by the second reading amendment, which took a bill which seemed like a pretty good bill that I voted for on committee of the whole and turned it into probably the most significant tax policy in the legislature this session. So we passed that amendment. So we're considering it based on where it stands now as it comes to us, which is about a $250 million, I guess it was more like $190 million, $190 million per year shift in where revenue goes from taxation. That's a really big deal, and we had good discussion about it on the floor about how that particular amendment was going to significantly and detrimentally affect local communities, cities, towns, and counties. That's accurate, right? There's no question that that action we took is detrimental to our small cities, towns, and counties. And it's a massive shift. We have the list. I hope you've all looked at the list. You can see how there are some pretty big changes. This amendment improves upon that. And to be clear, I'm going to vote against the bill almost regardless, unless it goes back to its original committee of the whole version, which we might have an option to do a little bit later, because I think this is a train wreck of a tax decision moving forward. But again, Mr. President, we're handed a bill at this point in time. Here is an amendment that improves the bill relative to its current position because the direct distribution formula is sensitive to the needs of small communities. And the hardship formula, right? This is something we've worked on for a lot of years. I applaud the good senator for thinking about bringing it because it mitigates the concerns but does not eliminate the concerns. In other words, it's better than where we're at right now, but still deeply bad, right? That's just the comparison. So I'm going to vote for it because it improves a very bad position in a way that helps all of our smaller communities and those that would not benefit from it. And I think that's reasonable, Mr. President, but I didn't mean to imply that it then makes it a good bill. And I share the original sponsor's concern that, you know, we took a modest little bill that I think everybody was generally, hey, that's a nice idea. I was. And we turned it into something that it was not intended to be. But since we've gone down that path, we need to start taking and making accommodations, Mr. President. And this one is sensible relative to the current position. I would encourage everybody to vote for this. And I understand it's incredibly complicated. It's long and complicated, but it is the standard distribution formula we have used for, I want to say, 8 years. And I realize that for folks that aren't experienced with that, it just looks like a deep pile of mud. And that's for good reason. It very much is a deep pile of mud. But it is the formula that's been used for about 8 years for the direct distribution with a portion of the funds that would come in, and it helps mitigate that concern. So while it looks daunting as a third reading amendment, honestly, it's pretty straightforward despite the length of it. It's using a recognized formula to help mitigate some of the concerns that were raised on second reading. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Dockstader for your second time.
Thank you. Could I have the sponsor help clear some of this mud away? going through page by page and doing a comparison to the earlier handout. How close are we to that earlier handout that gave a summary of each community? If the sponsor could address that, please.
Anybody else for their second time? Before we go back to the sponsor. Senator Larson.
Mr. President, thank you. I'm hoping the sponsor of the amendment answers my question I brought forward earlier. What are we doing with the excess above the 6 million?
Okay. Anybody else for their second time? All right. Oh, Senator Landon before the sponsor.
So, Mr. President, thank you. Just for clarification, I really appreciate my friend from over the hill. Good point made, what we did on second reading. And I kind of forgot about that. We've had some other things flying around and it's been laid back a few times. That is what created the problem for me related to all of those small communities out across our state, remember? And we got a handout on that, Mr. President, and several of the towns that you and I care an awful lot about are gonna get hit pretty hard. So we've got that Second Amendment laying there. And if this clears it up, maybe the senator from southern Carbon County can help us get there. But if we don't do something with that, I don't like what the Second Amendment did. So thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator Hicks, for your second time.
Well, you know, the good thing is I won't be brief, Mr. President, because there was a whole lot of questions out there. So let me see if I can wade through many of those. And Mr. President, honestly, I'm going to have particularly my colleague from over in the county of Lincoln, I wasn't able to hear all of his questions. So I'll go through as many of these as I can. And one of the questions was, I believe, is how are these going to be distributed? Because sales taxes are collected a monthly basis, they go under there. This will be distributed back out the current way we do local distribution. So twice a year, SLIB authorizes the sales, and that goes out to those cities, towns, and counties. To my colleague from the Ivory Towers, if you turn to page 6 and go to subsection F, this is the inflation formula to address your concerns going forward. So that's built into the model, that there's an inflationary component in there that deals as that it's adjusted based on, I think, CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So it takes into that account. Keep in mind, sales tax is the one source of revenue that we tend to see continually moving up as far as revenue sources. It's more reliable than any other source of revenue we have out there. But it does calculate that inflationary index in there too. To my colleague from Park County, the fiscal note on this was the original $38.6 million. The second reading amendment added another 149. This deals with 76. So we pull that first $76 million off. The remainder, the balance between what the bill did and then the second reading amendment, which do exactly the same thing. If you think that that second reading amendment hurt your little counties, so does the bill, because it distributes those sales tax in exactly the same formula as to what the bill does. And so if you're sitting here and you're saying, well, I'm really concerned about that second reading amendment because it hurts my little county, so does the bill. Keep in mind, the big winners here where all the sales tax are collected, which is my colleague from over on the very western side of the state that's interested in hotel liquor licenses, really advantages them, both the bill and the remainder of that. Same thing for my colleagues that have some very, very large mines in their county. The bill and the amendment, the remainder. And that's part of the reason that I brought the third reading amendment, was to try to negate or reduce those impacts and have a more equitable distribution, at least out of that $76 million, to try to say, look, we are not going to disadvantage little communities and little counties. We're going to bring an equitable distribution of sales tax back to the statewide as a whole, instead of just both the amendment and the bill. will disadvantage those little communities and those small counties at the same rate. And so, Mr. Chairman, I did not catch the question from my colleague from the county of Lincoln. If I did not answer his question, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we allow those that spoke to ask that question if I have not answered those. On and for the amendment, again, I think my colleague from the Ivory Towers may have characterized it's better than what we have right now.
Senator Dockstader, did you have your question answered, or would you like to repeat your
Thank you,
question?
Mr. President. Appreciate the opportunity. I was trying to do a cross comparison to what was handed out earlier for each of our communities. I'm being told that it's brought back, heard the word better in there, but I'm just not sure. I wanted him to address that. Senator, thank you.
All right, I'll give you some leeway, Senator Hicks, to answer that question, and then we'll move on to the vote.
You know, again, Mr. President, the intent is if you look at both the bill and the second reading amendment, sales taxes, other than the 40,000, it's just a flat fee that goes back to counties. Those are distributed back to the location where those sales taxes are derived. And again, that tends to be where there's a lot of transactions going on. What the amendment does is say, we're going to capture 76 million of that dollars, and we're not going to use that formula. And part of the reason for that is because to make it more equitable and send some of that sales tax revenues under our existing formula so we don't significantly disadvantage those poorer communities and enrich those communities that already have a tremendous amount of revenue already. And so that's what this amendment's trying to get to, in addition to providing just a steady stream that they can budget for, that they're gonna know that's gonna be there. I hope that answers your question. That's what this third reading amendment does, is take roughly 76 million out of that total between the bill and the second reading amendment was 183 million. This will take 76 million of that and redistribute that to make it more equitable for cities, towns, and counties, and not just because we sold a lot in this county, you get all that money back. That disparages and discriminates against smaller communities and smaller counties. I hope that answers the question.
All those in favor of Senator Hicks's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 60, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Chairs in doubt, standing division. All those in favor, please stand. (16) All those opposed? Less than 16. (13) Third reading amendment number 2 has been adopted to Senate File 60. Senator Scott? Third reading amendment number 1.
Mr. President, do we need to read it in again, or are we fine?
It's been read in, but
Okay.
we can read it
Mr.
again.
President, I move adoption of third reading amendment number 1. Mr. President, what this amendment does is it delays the effect of the bill by 1 year. And that will put the effect of the bill into the next biennium. It will give us the budget session to deal with the things, make sure we've got it right. Mr. President, the financial relationships between our cities and counties and the state are more than a little complicated, as we have just seen in the amendment we talked to a minute ago. I think the chance that we have got something a little wrong in this is relatively high. And I think we're going in the right direction, Mr. President. But I think putting it off a year so that we can make the change through the budget session, which is an appropriate one to deal with financial things like this. We have the mechanisms there. We can look at it in the intervening year, make sure we've got things right and we don't have to adjust things. I think this amendment, delaying it, Mr. President, makes the bill a safe bill to pass. I urge the adoption of the amendment.
Anybody wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, on and for the amendment, I do think it does exactly what my colleague from Natrona says. It does set it back 1 year, gives us a really good chance not only to evaluate this, but we're not even into the budget. We're not through all the other bills. We haven't done crossover. This gives us a chance to come back and reevaluate whether this program should be moved forward or not in context of all the other things that we're doing with local government funding associated with property tax. So it just makes sense to me is to let's get it out there. This will now drive a focus and say we're going to evaluate this as part of the big picture of local and state funding. So I would encourage you to adopt this amendment.
Mr. President, thank you. Always positive to see efforts to help, unless they're bad. We have so many tools in our toolbox to address this issue, such as an interim committee, rather than passing something into law with an admission that we don't fully understand its implications. We don't have to take action on this now. It's not now or never. We can do an interim. We can have a committee fully evaluate its implications with full stakeholder feedback. That's how the legislative process is intended. That each of you could get up and stand after third reading and explain this to the media, what the bill actually does and how it affects your communities. Because I'm confident 31 of us can't do that. Confident in that. So, I on and against the amendment because this is perpetuating bad policy of passing law into the green books that we promised to work on later. That's not how we do this. So on and against the amendment simply for the purpose of it's really bad policy.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would concur with the last speaker's comments. Unless we can get this bill back to its original form, I can't explain this to my constituents. I'm far from it. I'm a little slow on the uptake anyway. And it was simple from the get-go, and I like simple. And until I understand what the bill is actually doing, so I'm on and against the amendment and the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anybody else for the?
Yeah.
Anybody else for the first time? Anybody else for the first time? Anybody else for the second time before the sponsor? Senator Scott, back to you.
Mr. President, I do urge adoption of this amendment. I think the bill is going in the right direction. This simply delays it a year so we can make sure that we haven't done something we didn't intend, and that's really possible in one of these complicated areas. I have seen this done before in the legislature. We did it, the one I really remember is when we redid the criminal code. Again, it was complicated. We had we passed it, so the impetus to actually do something was there. And then we had a year to fine tune it, and it worked very well. And I think that's a reasonable way, Mr. President, to make progress on a complicated issue. Say we're going to go ahead and do it, but let's make sure we've got it right before we actually put it into effect. And it is a safety valve for this in case we have made a mistake in there. And it is a complicated area. So, Mr. President, I think we need the amendment, whether or not you ultimately decide to return it to its original form. We need this amendment as the bill stands right now, Mr. President.
Okay. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 60, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Sounds like it has been adopted. We are on amendment number, or I should clarify. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 60 has been adopted. Third reading amendment number 3. Will the reading clerk please read the amendment?
Senate File 60, third reading amendment number 3, delete.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excuse me. I would move third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 60. Good senators, what this does is deletes the Hicks second reading amendment that took my simple bill into a monstrous direct distribution thing. So it deletes the Hicks second reading amendment. It deletes the Scott third reading amendment. And it deletes the Hicks third reading amendment entirely.
Anybody wish to speak on the bill? We'll go with Senator Scott and then over to Senator Rothfuss. Third, on amendment number 3, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, this does, as I read it, take the bill back to its original form. Mr. President, I would represent the Senate. I think that's a rational course of action at this point. I'm going to vote against this amendment because I think we are making progress, and I think we do have the proper safety valves in there now. But the bill as it originally was, we could go ahead and implement right now. It wouldn't have tremendous consequences. The bill as amended forces us to take another look at this whole area. I think that's a good way to proceed. But, Mr. President, voted up or voted down, it is a rational course of action here, as is voting it down and going with the bill as it stands right now. Either way works.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for this amendment, I think this is the perfect amendment, really. Just take it back to the bill as introduced. Mr. President, I would say one thing which I think is kind of important. When you look to the spirit of the sponsor of the bill and what the sponsor wanted to accomplish, this is it. Pass this amendment, it goes back to that desire, and I think there was general support for the concept. It does take a little bit of general fund money away, distributes it back out to our cities, towns, and counties. Everybody does benefit. And to be clear, nobody loses as a result of the bill. It is just a general fund cost being distributed back out to cities, towns, and counties. That's what ends up happening with the bill going back to its original. But Mr. President, I do think it's very important to respect the intent of an original bill sponsor. I realize that we get to capture the bill and do with it as we see fit, and it's the body's bill. It's the body's legislation. But to the extent that we changed it so much that I don't even think the original sponsor would vote for it on third reading at this point in time. You've taken it a little off the rails at that point, right? I mean, just from a fairness standpoint. Let's go back to the original. Let's vote our conscience on that. And if we want to have the conversation about a significant change to our sales and use tax distribution, which I think is a great idea. I think changing it is a great idea, but changing it through a deliberative process, an interim committee, a lot of thought, a lot of spreadsheets, and a lot of understanding of exactly what it does, that's the right approach. So on and for this amendment, let's give the poor senator back his bill, and then let's vote on it.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I keep on hearing throughout this discussion, let's make sure we have it right. Let's make sure we have it right. Clearly, many of us have questions of whether we have it right. Why do we not make this an interim topic and do it right? This is a major change, a major change. And I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure that when I go back to my constituents, I know what we're doing. I want a discussion. I want to know that we're doing it right. We had an amendment to hold it back a year. Bringing this amendment by the author is what we need to do. I will say this, if this amendment does not pass, I cannot vote for this bill either. Let's do it right. I think the idea is a good idea, but I want to be clear on what we're doing, how it affects my small communities, and then we can go forward with a discussion through the interim that we're doing it the right way.
Anybody else for their first time? Senator Dockstader.
You know, Mr. President, I'm concerned. We've messed with this so much, the concept of taking it back to where it is, got some backfill in there for our towns and counties. We seem to have cut their attention in the last day or so. So maybe it's time to just take this back to the basics, give that the original consideration on and for the amendment.
Thank you. Anybody else for their first time? Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, this amendment takes it back to the original, which is favorable to the people that pay sales taxes because it returns the money by who paid in sales taxes. So that helps the larger counties and the counties that pay a lot of sales taxes, and it hurts the little counties and cities that don't have a lot of sales taxes. So if we take it back, that helps my county. If we don't take it back, those amendments that the senator from Baggs put in puts that money back like it used to be to the smaller counties. So I'm neither here nor for or against. Either way, I think my county wins. Thank you.
Anybody else? Senator, let's see, Rothfuss, you've gone once. Senator Hicks, have you spoke for your first time yet?
Yeah, Mr. President, I just want to thank the Senate. This is what we do, is we debate bills and we debate issues and we look at alternatives and we try to find out and do what's right. This has been a great discussion. I think we all know that maybe there's a path forward to start looking at a different way to do business. So I appreciate all that discussion that's gone on. Vote it up, vote it down. I do think this brings to a point that may be the point to start out with a discussion on how we look at restructuring some of these distributions of these taxes through the state of Wyoming to provide some more parity across the state. So I'm not opposed to it, but I think the very same arguments that you used for the amendment and what we've done is to say it's a big step, it's a lot of change. I would argue that the bill does the same thing. That's a policy consideration that this body will make. We will make that policy. It's $38.6 million. Don't take that lightly, folks. It's a redistribution of $38.6 million. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying if we really want to study the implications of redistributing sales tax, that argument is equally as well, whether it's the amendment or the bill. But I do want to thank the Senate for the professional debate we've had out here. Discussion and the input from almost everybody on this floor. So I'm very proud of the Senate.
Anybody else wish to speak for their first time before go around for a second time? Second time, Rothfuss. Back to the sponsor, then Senator French. Bring us home.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's bring this back to the simple bill it was. It morphed into a direct distribution. Not saying that's not a good discussion. It needs to be a discussion, like people are saying, in the interim or whatever, before we get to about a year from now, a budget session. 38 million versus several hundred million. And, I hope you would vote aye on this.
Okay. All those in favor of Senator French's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 60, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Third reading amendment number 3 has been adopted to Senate File 60. We're back on the bill. Any debate on the bill? Seeing none, question being called. Senate File 60, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass the Senate? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 60, third reading roll call. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Steinmetz? Aye. Smith?
Excused.
Excused. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 60, 30 aye, 1 excused.
Senate File 60, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 60 has passed the Senate. Senate File 62, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 62, Restrooms in Publicly Funded Schools, 2, sponsored by Senator Larson, an act relating to school districts.
There is an amendment. Will the reading clerk please read the amendment?
Senate File 62, third reading amendment number 1, page 4 after line 22 in.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I would like to move, third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 62. We had an issue come up that came up that we didn't actually
I'm
anticipate.
sorry, Senator, you said third reading amendment number 2. It's third reading amendment number 1.
Oh, sorry, my bad. My eyes are getting bad as I get older.
That's
I
okay.
need to start wearing some reading glasses, I guess. So, yes, make that, you want me to just redo it again?
Could you please read it again?
Absolutely. I'd like to move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 62, and ask for your favorable consideration. We actually had one of the senators here from another adjoining county that brought up a situation we hadn't thought about with this bill. And so what this amendment does, they actually have a co-ed hockey team, and there's no suitable meeting room other than a locker room for them to meet. And, we have these issues with co-ed teams, but they're not, generally, it's like a co-ed track team where they have a separate girls' locker room and a separate boys. This particular situation was a co-ed team where they only have one locker room to meet. And so we just added this in on page 4 after line 22. If a suitable meeting room or area is not available, and the coach is the coach of a school-sponsored athletic activity with members of both the male and female sexes on the team, or in the activity, the coach may enter a locker room before, during, or after the school-sponsored athletic activity if all the students are fully clothed. If available, the coach shall be accompanied by not less than one additional adult at all times, but an additional adult shall not be required if members of the activity of both sexes are present in the locker room. The adults present shall not be current high school students. So I think it's a simple fix. We just wanted to make sure we covered all our bases with this bill, and I think this amendment doesn't ask you to vote for it.
Any discussion? Senator Larson.
Mr. President, thank you. I think this is a good amendment. We're catching an issue that one school district may be having, and maybe others have it too.
Thank you. Senator Crum.
Likewise, I speak in favor of the amendment. It certainly affects some communities in our part of the world that are real small. It allows the teams to come in and meet when there's no other meeting rooms available. So I would encourage support of this amendment.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on the amendment? We ready for the question? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 62, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. That amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any further discussion? Senator Larson.
Mr. President, I'm guessing most know how they're going to vote, but this is important for many of the schools out there. They will not bring forward a policy without it. I think they need a little direction. They don't ask for that very often. But this is bigger than a single district. They don't want to go to court and fight this alone. So let's give them direction. Vote aye.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not to spend too much time, but I did reach out to my district. This is not a bill that they want. I have a good district and they've got things handled. They would prefer to leave things like this at the district level. You know, on the other hand, if it provides some comfort somewhere to some district, I'll have to make that choice when it comes time to vote. But anyway, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too reached out to a couple of my districts, haven't got to all of them yet. They basically said it's kind of immaterial to them. They've got it handled the way it is. They have facilities available, one in a brand new school and one in a very old school. So most of these districts are capable of making these kind of decisions on their own. I would leave it to local control.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else wish to speak? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and in favor for this bill. I think it's necessary. I know the issue was more pronounced maybe in our area, Senator Larson and myself's area, but I feel it protects everybody involved, whatever class you fall into. So please support this bill.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the bill, and I think we all understand that there are challenges out there and concerns out there and a lot of districts struggling. We did hear from one district that they wanted a final decision, but that's one district among 48 that was interested in the top down. And honestly, what it came down to was lawsuits, and this is already in the courts. This bill specifically is in the courts, at least something very similar that it was based on. So we know that lawsuits are coming in this circumstance, and it really is a desire to shift that lawsuit from the local district of one district that is concerned about putting forward a policy to the state. At the same time, though, Mr. President, I believe every district in the state has a policy or has dealt with this effectively. Our school district is dealing with it and has dealt with it and has no interest in being told how to manage it. I concur with the good senator from Natrona County that they've got this for the most part, and they want to have the authority over it. And Mr. President, it's not just that they're being selfish about control, it's about an understanding of local circumstances that differ from district to district that play a critical role in this circumstance. This tends to be kind of the one-off situation where there's an individual or a small number of individuals that deserve specific accommodation and conversation, and that school deserves the opportunity to engage specifically to figure out what a solution is that works for the building, for the students, for the faculty, for the administration, and for the student that needs the accommodation. The system we have right now not only allows for that, it encourages that. If we amend statute and put this in the green books, first of all, it's kind of an awkward thing to put in green books, candidly. When you read through it, the amount we've talked about when a coach can and can't walk into a locker room might tell us we're in the weeds a little bit. But when you're dealing with policies like this, those weeds are necessary, and they're perfect and ideal for a school district to work on themselves when they can make the changes based on when the parents come in and have conversation, based on when the teachers have needs, based on when the students have needs, as is appropriate. This is a great issue for local control. Let's support our trustees on this one. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank Thank you. Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, thank you. I hesitate to speak up on this bill, but here's what I've learned from our school districts specifically. And this is a shot across the bow. Don't talk to me about local control when it's fun topics to discuss and you want to defer the difficult social issue topics to the state legislature for cover. Because I remember saying, let's let the parents, teachers, and coaches figure out who should play on 5th grade soccer teams. That wasn't really appropriate for the Wyoming legislature, the strongest form of centralized government in the state. And you know what I learned later? They really wanted us to make that decision for them because it was too hard otherwise. So that's where we are. I didn't see communications from your school districts or from your school boards saying anything. It's all secret. It's all quiet. Why? Because it's hard. It's really hard. So it's time for a little ownership and personal responsibility on these school districts about what it is they really want and who they're really saying that to. And so, yeah, the state government is going to start taking over some of these local decisions. From a legal perspective, I do believe our schools have been a landmine from students, parents, and the feds, making the lives of teachers and those responsible for the administration of education immensely difficult, distracting from reading, math, history, and all of the things we want them to learn, the Constitution. And I blame students, parents, and the federal government and politics for exacerbating that situation we have in our classrooms. So I know that these schools are trapped between federal policy, local demands, and they're looking to a strong centralized form of government to make it for them, and so we shall. We will determine who can walk in the rooms within their buildings, and we will determine who will play on their teams. This is what I believe they're actually asking for, and I believe it provides the cover from poor federal policy and provides some legal protection to them on and for the bill.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a lot of times I wish our locals would give us comments and statements. I wish the local governments would speak up about these property taxes more. If it's going to hurt them, say something about it. I wish our schools would have a joint statement, but if they're not, I'm happy to give them some ground cover and vote aye on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Question being called. Senate File 62, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass the Senate? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 62. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstader? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith, excused. Steinmetz? Aye. President Biteman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 62, 27 aye, 3 no, 1 excused.
Senate File 62, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 62 has passed the Senate. Senator Driscoll?
Mr. President, thank you. Point of inquiry before I try to suspend rules. I've got a very similar situation to what you had, Mr. President. I have on my screen a 25 LSO-0783 version 1.1, Wyoming Generational Investment Account 2, and it shows it's numbered on the SharePoint, but it never got numbered. And I'm willing to do the suspension of the rules, but I'm not sure, maybe we can do it without it if it actually shows. I think it was the day we had the glitch in the system, and like I said, I've got the screen sitting here on it, says that it's numbered, but they show it came in afterwards. What would you like me to do? It's a point of inquiry. I'm happy to read the script and suspend rules if we need to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Let me discuss with the chief clerk, 1 second. Senator Driscoll, I think we would be best to go through the motion. I'm sure the Senate will have your back, so why don't you go ahead and make that motion?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think the body understands. A quick explanation, so I can't talk about it once I've made the motion, but this is just one of our fall-throughs that had, this has nothing to do with our staff. It has to do with the way the computer registered it on there, and so I'm asking the body to go ahead. We'd spent a lot of time working on this bill. Actually, it was a bill you and I had done together, and I think it's an important bill, so I'd ask for the body's grace in suspending the rules so we can go ahead and get it introduced. Pursuant to Senate Rule 4-5A, I move for approval by the Senate to consider bill draft number 25 LSO-0783 V1.1, Wyoming Generational Investment Account 2. This draft missed the noon deadline for Monday for approval. I guess it is discussion. I'd be happy to stand for questions, but ask for your favorable consideration so we can get this bill down the track. I think it's significant to the state and to this body. Thank you.
Question.
Question being called. Chief clerk will call the roll. And then, to remind you, this takes a 2/3 vote. Chief clerk, please call the roll.
Motion by Senator Driscoll. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Culp? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith excused. Steinmetz? Aye. President Biteman?
Aye.
Aye. French? No to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. The ayes were 30, excused 1.
Pursuant to, that motion has been adopted pursuant to Senate Rule 4-5A LSO 07383 will be numbered. Senator Barlow, did you have a privilege of the floor?
Mr. President, thank you very much. So members, as you came in today and throughout our morning working, you saw a Wyoming flag up here on the front of the dais in front of our chief clerk. And that was sent to me by some of our Wyoming Guard who are deployed overseas. And I think there's a picture we were going to try to put up on the screen of these folks with that very flag. And what they're doing there is, maybe you can tell from the picture, maybe you can't, but they've all got a cigar in their hand because they just had a successful mission. And I'll read you what they sent me. Is there's another picture, but what they said is, this flag was carried by the soldiers of the 1st Platoon, Bravo Battery, 2nd 300th Field Artillery Regiment during a precision strike mission in eastern Syria. It bears witness to the removal of terrorist forces from this earth, ensuring they will never again enjoy safe haven to plot attacks against our homeland or our allies abroad. November 26, 2024. And it goes on and it has the folks that were actually in the fight with this particular Maria, HMAR Maria is her name, and then signed by a very good friend of mine, Sergeant First Class Lee Boyd. He asked that this be delivered to the governor, but since it came to the Senate first, I wanted to present it to you. And what I'd like to do, Mr. President, and maybe it's at the end of the day is more appropriate since we're getting into lunch hour, is I'd like to have the flag, carry the flag, and the entire Senate pose with that flag, and we'll send them back to them just to, and maybe a care package if folks want to put some things together to send back to our folks overseas. So, Mr. President, from Bravo Battery, HMAR B11 Maria, to Wyoming, back home to Wyoming, the Senate first, and then I'll deliver it to His Excellency the Governor, and actually ask him to fly the flag, if that's possible, one day in front of the Capitol. So anyway, let's give a hand to our troops overseas serving.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Barlow, and thank you to those troops overseas fighting for our freedom. Senator Brennan,
May I have privilege of the floor?
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Up in the gallery behind you is my 2 daughters and my mother. They've been listening to our exciting debate for the last hour after they got done with piano and dance. So if you just welcome them to the Senate.
Welcome to the Senate. Okay. Madam Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Does it, though? I don't know. Mr. President, I move that we stand recessed until 2 p.m. 2 p.m.
Recess till 2 p.m. Announcements. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Labor Committee will be meeting at 12:30 in room 110 to hear 2 bills, Senate File 130, Senate File 140, Emergency Assistance Immunity, Mental Health Services, Senate File 147, Service Dogs Training and Crimes. And I'm just updating for the public as well, Senate File 125 was laid back until a future meeting time at the request of the sponsor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee 6 will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., room W4 downstairs, the Wind River Room, to take up Senate File 139, Trapping Requirements, Licenses, Seasons, and Setbacks, Senate File 140, Trapping Education Requirements, and Senate File 149, Wildlife Conservation License Plates Amendments. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation Committee will be meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in the Capitol Extension and online to consider a bill that was carried over from last meeting, Senate File 119, Expedited Professional Licensure for Military Members, Senate Joint Resolution 7, NCSL 50th Anniversary, and Senate File 141, United States Marine Corps Corporal Seth Rasmussen Memorial Highway.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, your favorite committee, Minerals, number 9, will meet today upon noon recess, about 12:30, in Capitol Extension Room W4 and online. We'll hear 2 bill numbers. Senate File 135, Defense of State Banking, and Senate File 143, Public Monies Deposits in Credit Unions. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee number 5, Senate Ag, State and Public Lands and Water Resource will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in Capitol Extension Room 6 and online to hear 2 bills. Senate File 103, terminating and defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Senate Journal Resolution 002, demanding equal footing.
Thank you. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 3, Committee Revenue will meet at 12:25 in room W6 to discuss Senate File 85, Constitutional Enforcement of Localities, Senate File 0150, For-Profit Trade School Property Tax Exemption, Senate File 153, Residential Real Property Taxable Value. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
President.
you. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 2, Appropriations, will be meeting tomorrow upon noon recess in room 113. We'll be dealing with 5 bills. Senate File 68, Government-Owned Lands. Senate File 112, Anesthesiologist Assistance Licensing. Senate File 127, Administrative Rules, Legislative Review and Objection. Senate File 148, Fire Suppression and Restoration Funding. And Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Forester. I will also mention, Mr. President, that I have requested that the supplemental budget be passed out to your desks at the noon hour, and the Senate Appropriations Committee will be going through that starting Friday. So just a heads up for everyone. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further announcements? You've all heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Senate will stand at recess till 2 p.m.